English translation, 707th Contact, Part 1. Saturday the 28th of April 2018, 13:19 hours.
Be welcome and greetings, dear friend. You have been away for a long time.
So welcome to you too, Edouard, dear friend, and thanks for your welcome. Yes, our absence lasted longer than intended, but it was not possible for us to interrupt the very important business.
So you are all back now, also Injana and Florena?
Yes, both of them will come here tomorrow together with me because we want to settle the matter of applications for the election when you have received the applications.
I have, yes. All but 2 are sealed, so I have not opened them either. I also think that this is not my job, but yours, because I do not want to interfere in the matter under any circumstances, but to remain neutral, which is why I also do not get involved in any advice or disputes. In my opinion, the election must remain the sole business of the core group members and must be handled by them.
With which you are acting in a correct manner. From our side, however, we have some explaining to do, because there are not enough suitable core group members for the offices that arise and need to be determined. Which is why we have to make clarifications in cooperation with our committee and necessarily also bring in our advice for filling some offices.
I see, and I guess that cannot be avoided. But how should it be with your panel? Do you want to go back first to consult together? I think the time is a bit short if you want to come back tomorrow to process the applications. Do you want to take those with you today, then?
No, I can leave them here and open them tomorrow together with Florena and Injana, because we will do our committee work from here, from your workroom, by connecting. So we will come here tomorrow and the day after and do what is necessary.
Good, so be it. Look, here are these notes. These are all issues that have come up during your 2-month absence. But to bring them all up today is probably not possible because it is simply not possible in terms of time, because it would be too much. Consequently, I will confine myself to just a few major ones.
Yes, that's a lot of notes. I also do not think we can go through them all today.
Exactly. But then this question here. Are you familiar with biotechnology? If I remember your father Svath's explanation correctly, it is a biological genetic technique in which artificial changes are made in the DNA of plants, animals, creatures, etc., in such a way that certain manipulations are made in relation to a particular organism. In such a way that thereby certain manipulations are created and achieved in relation to a single gene removal, its several or through a new gene composition, valuable shape changing, energy enhancing, resistance increasing, growth promoting, behavioral or other significant beneficial sublimations or refinement processes to a higher level of value increasing peculiarities, improvements, refinements, value increasing structural changes. Svath explained that through this genetic technique, a great deal of usefulness had been created among you in earlier times, and a great palette of problems had been solved with it.
In earlier times, as you say, that was indeed the case.
Today, our scientists are carrying out genetic manipulation on plants and animals, to which I have spoken several times with your daughter Simyase, as well as with Quetzal and with you, and have received the answer that genetic manipulation can be very helpful, good, and beneficial in certain respects. But now that what I had learned from Svath has come back to my mind, it is not clear to me whether your positive answers referred to biological genetic engineering, or to the genetic manipulations carried out by our earthly scientists, which are not supposed to be helpful, useful, and positive in the best of ways.
The answers to your questions referred to the biogenic technology we bring to bear, which in no way has anything to do with the genetic manipulations practiced by earthly scientists, but on the contrary can be controlled absolutely in positive, beneficial, and harmless ways.
Thanks. Then the matter is clear, and it can be said that biotechnology cannot be compared or even equated with genetic manipulation in the conventional sense.
That is correct.
Then please see here, this printout Barbara printed out from the internet net. This picture is about an animal called a tanuki. But do you know what a tanuki is?
In terms of earthly animals, I'm not very knowledgeable.
It is a dog-like predator, but it is not actually native to Europe, but immigrated from Asia, so it is a rare stranger. I also did not know much more before Barbara brought me the internet printout. I was familiar with this animal from my time in Asia, but I did not know much about it. But why I am talking about it is because I saw such a tanuki on the morning of the 23rd of April when it came out from behind the Russian caravan, stopped on the path, eyed me, and then traipsed on up to the garage. I do want to ask you now, though, have you read my article beamed to you by Bermunda or her father Quinto?
Yes, I have read the article and find, as usual, that you have made a great effort and clarified many things that are important and significant for Earth humans to know, because the facts mentioned are concealed from the public and also disputed.
Then I will add what you have written without further comment at the end of our conversation.
You can, but you should also publish the article.
I will do that, and I will do it in the second My Zeitzeichen, which will also be published on the internet. Unfortunately, there is no other possibility, because no public media would publish it, because they are all too cowardly to do so, or they are bigots or such USA power worshippers that they would simply let the article disappear, as they did in the 1940s, 1950s, and also in later years when I sent them predictive warnings and corresponding articles. The authorities and governments that have been written to have done nothing either, so that since then and up to the present day, a tremendous amount of damage has been caused to the whole world and to nature, and irreparable destruction has been wrought. Just as more and more, faster and more devastating destruction continues to be wrought without salvation. And this is happening in particular due to the idiotically and crazily cultivated overpopulation, which on the one hand no one wants to admit, and which on the other hand is therefore being driven inexorably higher and higher, resulting in further machinations and effects that bring more and more disaster, unrest, unfreedom, injustice, wars, crimes, misery, and hardship to the entire world and its humanity. For these consequences, the whole main thing is based above all in the religions and in the greed for power as well as the obsession with money or wealth of the human beings, whereby these three factors are inseparably connected with each other and have brought disaster since time immemorial, as will also be the case in the future, and will therefore continue. And the fact that everything could come about at all in the measure of destruction and annihilation of nature and its fauna and flora that exists worldwide today, resulted from the inexorably growing overpopulation, because of which innovations had to be created again and again, and machinations arose that led to the destruction and annihilation of many things. So whole landscapes, forests, meadows, mountain slopes and fields as well as watercourses, shores of waters and beaches were and continue to be destroyed and irreparably destroyed by building up, asphalting and concreting over everything as a result of the needs of the growing number of ever-increasing populations. Inevitably, unavoidably, and of necessity, the growing mass of overpopulation demands a great many innovations, such as new nuclear, hydroelectric and wind power plants, residential buildings, roads, schoolhouses, educational institutes, paths, recreational centers, airports, railway lines, cable cars, chairlifts and factories, etc., which must continue to be built. However, as a result of this, nature, its fauna and flora, the inland waters and seas, the climate, the atmosphere, and, as a result of the exploitation of the Earth's resources, also the planet itself are constantly, inevitably, continuously and inevitably being destroyed and destroyed more and more irreparably in relation to the increasing number of people in the world and their needs and machinations. Due to the overpopulation madness, the production of natural gas and petroleum had to be increased tremendously, and the mining of coal, auras and other minerals, as well as the yields of natural foodstuffs, had to be increased immeasurably, which was only made possible by chemical growth stimulants. But this also made food crops more and more susceptible to pest insect infestations and diseases, which in turn had to be counteracted with toxic chemical agents produced by chemical companies that raked in milliards upon milliards of money for this purpose. This, While on the one hand, the natural foodstuffs are contaminated by all the chemical poisons, and these are then eaten by the human beings, as a result of which many fell ill with various ailments, wasted away and died. And on the other hand, the whole of nature with its fauna and flora, as well as the waters of all kinds and the atmosphere were also poisoned. As a result, many plant, animal, and other life forms have been affected to such an extent that they have even become extinct, whereby various genera and species of plants, animals, creatures, insects, birds, and reptiles have already been tremendously decimated or have even become extinct. This also applies to life forms of all waters, such as frogs, crayfish and aquatic mammals, etc., as well as to various species of fish in inland waters and oceans, which have been impaired and poisoned either by overfishing or by chemical poisoning, plastic, synthetic, and other toxic civilization waste, and some of which have already become extinct. But this only refers to what has happened so far, because the whole madness is continuing in the same way and, moreover, on an increasing scale, because the growth of overpopulation is not stopped by a worldwide long-term birth stop and a worldwide controlled birth regulation, and thus the world population is drastically reduced, and it is brought to a population that is suitable for the planet and sustainable. But what is to be named as the reason for all the degenerations of the Earth's human beings, which have driven them to bring more and more disaster, unrest, lack of freedom, injustice, wars, murder and manslaughter, crime, misery and hardship upon the entire world and the entire Earth human since time immemorial can basically be found in the religions. All the malignant and catastrophic afflictions that have persisted from time immemorial to the present day and that will also continue to be rampant in the distant future found their origin in the religions at a very early time. However, neither the believers in religion and the representatives of religion nor those in power and the population want to admit this, and therefore they all deny it, as do narrow-minded scientists and other know-it-alls who want to know everything better. So they all vehemently deny the effective fact of the three following facts, which are the primary and overriding cause of the entire existing wretchedness of all human degenerations with regard to all malicious destruction, crushing, devastation, deterioration, degradation, and annihilation of nature, its fauna and flora, and thus of all life forms of every species and kind, of all waters, of the atmosphere, of the climate, and of the whole world. No one or hardly any human being, except a few with intelligent intellect and reason, thinks about this and also does not recognize that religions, might, and money are in fact the fundamental and interwoven block of all the evils, wars, all terrorism and all degenerations prevailing on earth and among earthly human beings, whereby the religions, to which believing human beings are delusionally addicted, are fundamentally at the forefront of all this. Considering the whole in relation to the religions and thus starting from them, it follows that from the religions, which are very numerous and extremely diverse on earth, religious, xenophobic and racial hatred, strife, wars, torture, murder and manslaughter, as well as hatred and terror against law, order, and humanity arise. And this because the respective alleged deity demands vicious punishment and revenge for offenses, etc., up to the death penalty, as well as torture and war against other peoples, etc., which is maliciously and at the same time ridiculously presented as divine guidance and protection and love, whereby the clueless believers without understanding, intelligence and reason take the whole religious nonsense at face value and believe that they have to hype their imaginary God and his false love imputed to him. This once considered and said with regard to the effects and repercussions of religions in terms of influencing the consciousness, thoughts and feelings as well as behavior of believing human beings through the suggestively acting religious nonsense of faith, which not only crushes intelligence and allows neither understanding nor reason to come into its own, but impairs them to the point of uselessness and pathological stupefaction. The way in which the majority of believers in religions and sects really think and operate in their faith has been proven since the time when religions first came into being. The effective fact is that the majority of believers are absolutely clueless, out of touch with reality, incapable of thinking for themselves, suggestively unstable, submissive, compliant, suppressible, immature, and obedient. In this way, They are helpless figures who become the very easy prey of the religion and sect catchers, and believe their nonsensical fairy tales and then worship some higher power, such as a god, Son of God, Savior, Goddess, Omnipotent, Omnipotent Mother, Omnipotent Father, Creator, World Leader, Creatoress, World Leaderess, or as all the religious and sectarian divinities are called. In the whole of religious and sectarian belief, the truth is that the believers worship their deities and the like in submissive humility and self-abasement, follow in certain ways the supposedly divine guidelines, laws, commandments, and regulations, and also try to live according to them. In doing so, this following and living according to it is only just according to how the whole can be used for personal good and well-being as well as possessions, and is justifiable. But more that does not bring personal success and benefit is unacceptable and frowned upon. And this fact also proves itself with the believers in religion and sects in the relationship, if any fellow human beings are better off in any way than the believers themselves. If others have more goods and chattels, more wealth, fewer worries and problems, more peace and freedom or happiness, better earnings, a more expensive car or other things, etc., then discord, envy, greed, and even hatred, etc., rise up in them. This, however, is denied, because these impulses and the outward behavior in this regard are not compatible with their faith, make a bad impression, and reveal the whole hypocrisy of faith. As a rule, the whole of the faith and the activity with regard to the fulfillment of the faith precepts of the majority of believers in religions and sects only lasts until they suffer financial or other material damage at the hands of fellow human beings and are psychologically or physically harassed. If this happens, then it turns out, as has been known since time immemorial, that in such situations the majority of believers flip out and hatefully take revenge and retaliate, up to and including murder and manslaughter, as is also the case with the majority of non-believing human beings. In this way, believers engage in self-sabotage because they cannot reconcile their faith with the effective reality of reality, and thus cannot solve the problems that arise. Every realistic understanding and rational human being knows that a human being who believes in religion intends to achieve something in life with his faith, and how he wants to behave and what he wants to do as a believer. But then something happens and hits him that harms him physically or psychologically, possibly brings him financial harm, endangers his general security in life, endangers his work, his well-being, or his material prosperity, and that then suddenly makes him pay attention and deviate from his delusion of faith. All of a sudden, the will for self-preservation stirs in him, and he realizes subliminally that he is constantly standing in his own way with his religious sectarian delusion. Although he does not openly and self-confidently think that he has fallen for a false, erroneous and confused hoax with his delusional belief and is completely out of touch with reality, he suddenly begins to think and act contrary to his beliefs for his own protection and self-preservation, becomes spiteful, falls prey to envy, greed, hatred, violence, revenge, and retaliation, and ultimately also no longer shies away from killing and murdering. But all this also continues when the governmental power elites and their vassals instigate discord or even wars with other peoples and states, because also then the believers in religion and sectarianism diligently get involved, allow themselves to be drafted into the military, arm themselves, and then march against the enemies set up by the rulers in order to murder them in war, usually under the alleged protection and right of their deity, who is invoked by the military powers for a good outcome and victory of the wars, seeking help and praying for blessings. It does not matter that under certain circumstances religious and sectarian beliefs forbid killing, murder, and all other atrocities and crimes, because when one's own skin is at stake, which has to be protected, beliefs and even the best intentions are suddenly forgotten and become nothing. For then the old saying comes into its own: if you do not want to be my brother, I will bash your head in. A truly intelligent human being never falls for a belief, because religious and sectarian human beings are weak in intelligence as well as unaccountable in their reason and intellect. And this is also the case when they hold a doctorate or professorial title, etc., and prove a high IQ, because titles and IQ are in truth no more than smoke and mirrors. The human being must be knowledgeable, but not a believer, and thus also self-confident, and must also find out how self-confident he really is, and thereby expand his valuable knowledge and self-confidence more and more. The world must be seen as it actually is in its reality of effective reality, but not according to religious and sectarian beliefs and convictions that lead to wrong decisions. Nor must one's thoughts be constantly bad and negative. Not even when evil and unpleasant things are happening in the world or in one's personal sphere, for not only the bad and negative things must be seen. If only the world is thought to be a dangerous place, then thoughts and feelings are directed towards it, and everything is seen to be full of danger. The thoughts determine the feelings and the psyche and form the filter of how the world, fellow human beings, life and nature and its fauna and flora are seen. If only the negative is seen, then the positive things are filtered out, while the negative things come into consciousness and create turmoil in thought-feeling psyche. Evil, fearful, hateful and stupid thoughts already suggest to the subconscious all that is degenerating for the future, as well as continuing to mess around only with human beings who equally think in a negative way and are addicted to a belief. And the human being is really responsible for this all by himself, because the way he sees the reality of reality is the way he also shapes and lives his life. The meaning we give to certain situations is crucial. In the past, human beings thought that the earth was a flat plate and were afraid that if they went beyond the horizon, they would then fall into a bottomless abyss. Then someone came along who wanted to know the truth, and therefore investigated the matter and found out that the earth is a sphere and can be walked around on. He thus called all that into question and permanently refuted the entire confused belief system that had existed until then, and the faiths and convictions associated with it. And so it must also be with the religious and sectarian belief systems and beliefs, which must be questioned, refuted, and dissolved so that human beings can once again begin to think clearly for themselves, to decide, to act, and to become self-confident. Only then, when they succeed in doing so, will they be able to shape the world free of religions and sects in a peaceful, free and just way and have it guided by rulers who will lead Earth humans into the future in all justice, without any behavior of power, exercise of power, without addiction to hegemony, G-vault, and coercion. However, all human beings must be aware of one thing, namely that this is founded in the decision whether the might of religions and sects should continue to dominate the thoughts of human beings through delusion, or whether they want to follow the effective reality of reality, free of any delusion and actually become independent, self-thinking, self-deciding, and self-acting. But still the human beings of Earth are slaves of the religious delusion of faith, because since childhood they have been subjected to delusional and humanly invented divine norms and dogmas, whereby they have lived all their lives as prisoners of their religious delusion of faith, and have coped very laboriously with their lives as prisoners of delusion of faith. However, the majority of the religious sectarian delusion of faith prisoners do not notice how the religions and sects, as well as the religiously oriented society and the politicians, state powers and their vassals, as well as the secret services, military and the economic powers restrict their lives, whereby it is already the case today that all these power elites almost completely control every single human being. It also follows from this that a human being fails every time he tries to break out of his religious faith and break free, based on any reasonable and logical suggestions. And he fails and is driven into stagnation because he is not persevering and not courageous, powerful and willing enough to defend himself against all the resistances of the religious faith hammered into him from childhood and against the might of religion acting on him from outside and hegemonically harassing him. To realize everything that leads the human being to question certain religious beliefs, or to try something new as a result of burgeoning and well-founded doubts, personally identified insights or through clear indications of real reality or clarities created for him by fellow human beings, usually fails because he hits hard against a wall built up by religions, sects, the power-obsessed state powers, politicians and religious society, and is thrown back. So he remains trapped in his religious delusion of faith and does not attain, use and live out his longing dreams, Consequently, he cannot realize anything at all that he has ever dreamed of, because everything outside his religious and sectarian delusion of faith is in the reality of reality and effective truth. This, however, cannot be understood by an individual human being who believes in his faith, let alone by the great mass of the majority of the delusional believers who languish as prisoners in their prison of faith. Although they would like to free themselves deeply unconsciously from it, and draw benefit for themselves from the reality of reality. This, however, is not possible for them as a result of their delusion of faith, because the whole of reality is so far outside their delusion in relation to reality that they cannot possibly achieve what they want. Many human beings struggle all their lives with their faith and the reality of reality, but they are unable to overcome the barrier or the said wall that they come up against when they want to break out to make their dreams of freedom. Peace, truth, and justice and self-determination are reality. However, most believers in religion fail in this respect because they are fully fanatical and in a pathological delusion so fixed and connected to the false beliefs and convictions that they cannot willingly break away from them. So they continue to live exactly as they have done since childhood, whereby they remain imprisoned in their delusional belief prison and believe that they live in a comfort zone or safe way and are protected and sheltered from all evil, negative and bad by their deity through their delusional belief. So, in their delusion, they continue to believe in what they have always believed. And so everything remains the same, and just as it has always been, is and will continue to be. So the majority of believers in religion and sects will hardly ever, if at all, turn away from their delusion of faith, and will also not orient themselves according to reality and its effective truth. But this means that in this respect they do not rethink for the better, the good, and the positive, and consequently also do not learn to act sensibly and realistically. This is because the believers in religion simply want to continue to live thoughtlessly and irresponsibly in their delusions, and thus defy the striving for and realization of the good and positive, thus giving peace in the world and among all human beings no chance. This, as they also do not open a way for freedom and justice, and also do not consider the necessity of striving for the powerlessness of the state leaders and their vassals, secret services, military and economic bosses, in order to put an end to their domineering and power-addicted actions. And since this does not happen, all unrestrained hatred, revenge, greed for revenge and profit as well as all warfare will continue to be driven on by them. Every true democracy will be prevented and misery, discord, unfreedom, injustice, war, and destruction will be brought upon the world and earth humanity. And this is what happens with all religions and sects when they worship their deities and idols invented by human beings, implore and submissively beg for victory and salvation for their war atrocities and war murder, rape, torture, and destruction. Effectively, it is the decision of each individual religion or sect, delusion-believing human being himself, as well as of each religion, delusion-believing human being, what he does or wants to do with his life. So everyone has to decide for themselves how and what and for what they want to believe something, champion it, and stand up for it. From a religious sectarian point of view, however, this is illusory, because one's own decision is only apparent when the human being falls prey to a religious belief. And this is so because the religious sectarian's suggestive influence, be it verbal or written, on an unstable human being thoroughly denies him the ability to make his own decision, and he becomes a slave to the suggestive inculcation. This, however, which is absolutely clear, only happens to human beings who are unstable in making their own decisions, incapable of making their own decisions or unstable in making their own decisions and pathologically susceptible to foreign opinions and beliefs, whereby, when they fall prey to the delusion of opinion and belief, they can no longer direct their thoughts towards the reality of reality and its truth, and only believe what is thrown at them as fodder for belief. The thoughts controlled by this kind of faith then form the feelings and the psyche, as a result of which he changes his life in delusion to the point of alienation from the world. Reality and incapacity to live due to the insane, crazy religious delusions and convictions and their effective untruths. For a sharp, correct and precisely observing, analyzing, and realistically thinking human being, it is very astonishing to observe and notice with what ease many human beings, also many with doctor and professor titles and high IQ, etc., change their world of thoughts, feelings and psychology, their opinions, behavior, their conduct of life and their activity in existence in a way that is alien to life and detrimental to life, when they are trapped by a religious delusion of faith or are afflicted by such a delusion. What the human being has absorbed through his unprovable convictions in a way of believing and considers to be true does not have to be correct at all, and usually is not, especially, however, with regard to everything religious and sectarian and the resulting pathologically conditioned delusion of faith. Only that which is based on the reality of incontrovertible reality and its truth, or on reality and its truth, is ever demonstrable in its form as genuine and true, and thus a provable certainty and correctness. And this, no matter what is thought about it, is always the absolute reality, which in its reality is indisputable and the only truth. Another truth than that of reality and its reality does not exist and can never become. Only reality and its reality correspond to the truth and can be proven at any time demonstrably in all and every things, because they are intellectually, sagaciously, clear-sightedly and rationally comprehensible to a rationally healthy and realistic human being, whereas every religious or other belief is built only on blind and unprovable suppositions and, contrary to provable reality, is founded only in things, hypotheses, assertions, delusions, and conjectures which reflect the sick, stupid, out of touch with reality, and perverse religious delusion of the human being who has lost his faith. The religious beliefs and convictions that determine the life of the faith-deluded human being and the state of his understanding of reality. Realities and truths block precisely this understanding through delusion. Consequently, the believer shapes his life only in such a way as he must lead it according to his religious beliefs and convictions, and thereby believes, by assumption or imagination, that he thereby lives happily, successfully, contentedly, and healthily. So he does not decide for himself whether he effectively lives happily, successfully, and healthily and is also satisfied. Because nothing of the beliefs is true, and every belief and every conviction only reflects what the belief suggests and becomes for the believing human being his own created false reality. As a result, he does not see the whole world as it really and truly is, but as he sees it himself through his delusional belief. A religious belief and a religious conviction do not correspond to any knowledge, to any particular situation or fact, and to no certainty and no proof, as is the opposite with reality and its reality and truth. Beliefs and convictions may inspire the unstable human being and his life, but truthfully they hinder him in every way to tap into certain resources and sources of reality and its reality and truth, which would help him to achieve results that would be of horrendous significance and importance for him overall, in terms of the development of consciousness, intelligence, mind, and reason. Every belief and persuasion is never based on a firm foundation. Consequently, they also give no certainty and no knowledge that would support the belief or persuasion. So, they are also not based on past or present experiences, just as they are not stored in the brain, and could serve as a reference experience or cause one to believe something. Consequently, they are completely irrelevant and useless, and that is regardless of whether they are lying, slanderous, hypothetical, or simply stupid and silly. Religious beliefs and convictions, as well as many others, are without exception changeable, namely by tearing out their old or individual elements and replacing them with new and better ones, whereby the human beings themselves form their own reality in this respect. But in this way, there is actually no such thing as reality at all. A reality created in this way can namely only be judged in the way that it always lies in the eye of the human being who imagines it and thus believes it to be contrary. So if the human being changes his beliefs and convictions, then he also changes the factors he accepts as facts, and thus he also enforces their results in his life. Basically, it is the case with beliefs and convictions that, because they are always based on hypotheses, lies, slander and suggestive persuasions, etc., the human being always finds confirmation for every belief and conviction. In whatever way, and in every case in such a way that everything is confirmed as correct, because it simply has to be that way in terms of belief. The fact that all these confirmations or proofs are of a purely delusional, assumed and therefore imagined nature is not accepted by the believer, because every believer, no matter what he believes in, always feels confirmed. Thus, every delusional human being with all his beliefs and convictions elevates himself to a status of rightness and self-conviction that is as bomb-proofly certain, true and indisputable for him as the corresponding nonsense is for a fanatical believer in fortune-telling. With beliefs, as with convictions, which also amount to persuasions, the painful thing is the same as with fortune-telling, for in every respect the positive is always a blessing and helpful in all of them, while the negative is exactly the opposite. And thus, because the believer is a believer in his beliefs and the convictions that have acted on him and continue to act on him, he sabotages his own consciousness and thus his own intelligence, his intellect, his reason, and thus also his life. Fundamentally, the power and thus also the power behavior of the human being emerges from the religions, and this because the human being, as an unthinking and non-self-thinking imitator, apes that which, with the alleged power of God, is presented to him as the highest power and is accepted and imagined by him as unprovable reality and false truth as reality and truth. The result is that the human being allows the alleged power of his illusory God to rub off on him. He completely thoughtlessly and consciencelessly claims this power for himself and exercises it over his fellow human beings and even over the fauna and flora. Inevitably, this leads to coercion and violence, oppression, enslavement, exploitation and malignant degenerations, as well as a pathological addiction to the domination of power, whereby everything becomes worse and worse as a result of the degenerations that inevitably break through. It must be said that power is extremely diverse and already begins in the family, depending on whether a patriarchy or a matriarchy prevails and thus whether a man or a woman exercises family power or family rule. In a very special way, however, power prevails where rulers and their vassals are at work, but also where officials exercise their might over the population, or where the military and secret services wield power maliciously. Through power, which also includes violence, isolation and coercion, the human being is held down, whereby the absolutely personal with corresponding behavior is also a means of power, such as when sexuality is abused as a means of power to humiliate women or men. In this respect, too, might is a relationship that has been raging between the sexes for millennia, and is nothing other than the exercise of power in relation to a relationship of violence. Through power, or the exercise of power, both in relation to the individual human being and also to a group, the population or the whole of humanity, the individual human being or the mass of human beings, is despised and exploited by those exercising power. This difference between those in power or exercising power and human beings subject to power is the basis for all distinctions between the top and the bottom. The distinction between those in power, those subordinate to power, classes, races, skin color and age, north and south, wealth and poverty. In the beginning, there was a thinking of equality and equal value as well as equal rights among all human beings. Then, however, came the first imaginary religions with delusional imaginary deities to whom a supreme power over life, death, existence and fate was attributed, in which human beings began to believe and at the same time also claimed for themselves the power delusionally attributed to the non-existent deity in order to rule over their own kind and over nature and its fauna and flora, and to exercise power by force and coercion. In the beginning, the deities were often of a female nature, that is to say goddesses, because the female was considered to be the bearer of life, nature and all existence. But this delusion and belief changed when the world of men came to the fore by seizing power over their families, women, actions, and deeds, and also over other human beings, groups, and peoples, thus bringing patriarchy to bear in a powerful way. Through this seizure of power by the world of men, it was easy and only a small thing to break the power of the divine bearers and to take the step towards a male deity and ultimately to a single god and ruler, and thus to monotheism, which in turn led to the sole rule or sole power of man. and he wielded this might over thousands of years up to the present day, using it with vicious, murderous, warlike violence to expand his sphere of power more and more with bloody massacres and conquests, and to dominate the peoples. And this is happening again and again, so also in the 21st century, and will also happen beyond, whereby the whole of this power behavior has since time immemorial concealed the truth of reality with regard to the peacefulness of the true human innermost being, and changed it over time in such a way that the majority of the human beings of the earth fell prey to the lust for power, and this became their own, and was lived out by them. This in particular by the bulk of all those elements who, with lies and false promises, allow themselves to be elected by the peoples as rulers and their vassals, but who then, as soon as they are in government and in their vassalage, indulge in their own power contrary to their election promises, etc., then they live out their greed for power unrestrainedly to the hilt and bully the peoples, instigate strife and wars, and thereby perpetrate massacres on millions of innocent human beings who want to live in peace, freedom, and justice. But because of the might and lust for power usurped by the world of men, a catastrophic abstraction has resulted from the early reality of the thought of equality, equal worth, equal rights, love and peace and freedom among all human beings given at the beginning. And this abstraction took place in the sense that all the high values of life acquired an extremely negative meaning, and consequently no longer have any apparent connection with the concrete facts of the original equality. Equal value, equal rights, love, peace, and freedom among all human beings. On the contrary, the original values are detached from this and oriented towards the lust for power, which contains everything that is power-related, such as all degenerated evil, negativity, badness, as well as murder, manslaughter, destruction, and irreparable destruction. The might that emanates from the human being, and by which he is dominated, is an abstraction produced by religions in relation to the reality of original human thought concerning equality, equal value, equal rights, love, peace and freedom among all human beings. It has long since outgrown the might of the divine bearer imagined by human beings towards the masculine and monotheistic deity, although this may no longer be understood in the original religious sense. And this is not because the human being has elevated himself to the status of actual God and tangible God of power, and has made himself his own creator of power. The whole thing has degenerated into a belief in power and, in this respect, into abstract thinking, and has thus become the basis of patriarchy, or rather of a social order in which every man who is addicted to power has a privileged position in the state and the family, and in which the male line is decisive in the succession and social position. So it is no wonder that since time immemorial, and even today and for a long time to come, women have either remained and will remain strangers in the sacred halls of thought, or have had to deny their identity and reality as women, and still have to do so today and in the future, although there have been, are and will be few exceptions throughout the ages. The historical extent and the immense, degenerated abysses of the greed for power, the exercise of power and the domination of power by those human beings of the earth who, as state leaders and their vassals, have led and continue to lead peoples into wars, misery, and ruin since time immemorial and right up to the present and future times, is immeasurable. The fact is that over millennia and millennia, power-obsessed men, with a few exceptions women, in governments and dictatorships, etc., as well as in families, groups, and peoples, interrupted by an excess of the manhood power mania and fascism, that is to say, according to a power leader principle, terrorized the populations and the world with murderously organized, undemocratic, anti-human, hegemonic, racist, religious, and egomaniacal, as well as egoistically related ideologies with wars and destruction, and put everything in fear and terror. So much for the might that has been wielded by the world of men since time immemorial, and has brought death, ruin, and destruction to the earth and its humanity since time immemorial. Religions and might were and are also connected with money and wealth since time immemorial, because if the whole thing is looked at and analyzed thoroughly, then it can already be seen in this respect in its origins that even the first religious rituals and religions and sects that arose from them demanded material gifts from the faithful. In its most primitive and simplest form, two goods were directly exchanged for each other in this way. Firstly, faith for an offering, or the good of religious ritual with the associated delusional faith for the good of the gifts, which was given or sacrificed in return. And this happened first of all by sacrificing to the goddesses and gods. In the delusion of faith, fruits, stones, crafted figures, meat, animal bones, animals, valuables, etc., and even human lives. Even the first religious cult, ritual and ceremonial leaders demanded free material gifts from their followers and believers, on the one hand for the purpose of ritual sacrifices, but on the other hand, all kinds of material values were also demanded for the personal maintenance and personal enrichment of the ceremonial leaders, but not least also for the construction of cult, ritual, sacrificial and religious meeting places, and in the course of time also for the accumulation of material values for the emerging religious groups and organizations. Whereas at first it was only inconsequential objects, etc., living beings of various kinds and species as well as human sacrifices. Everything changed in this respect with the expansion of the faith cults into effective religions and the sects that emerged from them. Consequently, over time, the voluntary offerings for sacrifices that were first demanded became more and more, because later the livelihood of the ceremonial leaders, who had become priests, was also added, as well as more and more demands for the maintenance of meeting places, places of prayer and places of worship, and for the accumulation of wealth for the religions and sects that arose. And this was especially driven up by the advent or invention of money, whereby more and more money was lured away from the believers by the leaders of the religions and sects for their own and for the enrichment of the religions and sects. Many hopeless believers in the religions and sects often lived in poverty and misery, but in their delusion of faith, they did not dare to pay the money demanded by the religions and sects because they were afraid of divine punishment. So they preferred to starve and die rather than not give the voluntary gifts, which in reality were and still are unconscionable exploitations, to the religions and sects, along with special contributions that were and are given as mites into the offering boxes. Now, with time, the system of enrichment of the religions and sects was understood and recognized by the believers that they could accumulate their own mites and gain wealth. They did this when they applied the money cash strategy of the religions and sects for themselves, but in such a way that they themselves dealt better, more sensibly and more sparingly with their possessions, goods and money, and saved everything that could be acquired unnecessarily, and were thus able to put aside a nest egg, some savings, and a money reserve. So they did the same as the enrichment systems of the religions and sects, saved up their own wealth and worked with it. Their accumulated accounts or monetary capital, their wealth, in turn, helped them to achieve financial freedom and to realize that through their possession of capital and their other material values of their possessions and goods and other possessions, they could not only live in prosperity, but also attain a great deal of power over their financially less fortunate fellow human beings. Furthermore, all their wealth also enabled them to get into governmental positions and to exercise their hegemonic might today and in the future. What I want to say further refers to the powerful of the world, be it the state powers and their vassals who follow them, such as their advisors, the secret services, the military, business tycoons, the influential domineering authoritarian imperious elites of the rich, as well as all those from the populations who are ignorantly and pathologically obedient to them. With few exceptions, they are all addicted to the might that they exercise in some way over their fellow human beings and even whole peoples, and often in such a way that mischief results from it, as by exerting violence and coercion on them or by starting wars, for which very often perfidious and deceitful reasons are sought. And this happens in connection with religions, might and money, for from this block quarrels, envy, greed, hatred, violence and coercion arise again and again, as through this in the whole world and among all earth humans also no peace, no freedom and no justice are created and cannot arise, but only war and terror. It is also to be said that the whole idea of peace, freedom and justice would also demand that all state leaders be deprived of their autocratic power and replaced by people who are friendly to human beings and the people and who are devoted to true democracy. And when I think of the USA in this regard, which in this respect practices the worst forms of warmongering, then these are once again in the foreground and in the very first place through the presidential oaf Trump. And this is because this irresponsible US head of state has been grumbling for about 3 years, as has the Israeli firecracker Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that Persia or Iran must be warred against and destroyed because this country with alleged nuclear weapons is a danger to US America and the world and should not have nuclear weapons, but US America and Israel do. All the other nuclear powers are also likely to be involved in this, although both Trump and Netanyahu remain silent about this. So, for this reason, US presidential stumblebum Trump wants to terminate the so-called nuclear deal with Iran, as already happened in Iraq as a result of blind presumption, for which, however, the effectively true reason is not the announced presumption that Persia is operating weapons-grade uranium, enrichment in order to produce nuclear bombs and attack the USA. The whole thing is based on a typical US underhandedness, if it really does terminate the nuclear deal, and that is that an enormous stink can be raised with Iran in order to then let the US Army march into Persia by war, to be able to seize the oil deposits and to bring the country under US control, or even to annex it or take possession of it by force. And that the Israeli clown-in-chief, firecracker Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, will shout his pro and hooray in this regard should be absolutely clear and should cause the world to startle and howl just as much as if President Trump were to actually cancel the nuclear deal with Persia and thus get the entire world economy into trouble. This is in addition to the fact that the entire people of Iran will then also howl and no longer restrain themselves from resuming uranium enrichment and building nuclear weapons. Apart from that, if the Israeli clown Netanyahu continues his hate tirades against Persia, it is inevitable that the hatred against Judaism, which has been simmering for a long time, will boil up again in extreme right-wing and neo-Nazi circles around the world, especially in Germany and the USA, and lead to vicious degenerations against the Jewish faith. And the fact that the Israeli machinations against the Palestinians in the Arab world are also steadily increasing hatred against Israel and thus against the Jewish faithful is not really surprising. So it would be desirable that those responsible for the state of Israel and their vassals and military etc. would restrain themselves and seek peace and solutions with the Palestinians. The damnable religions and sects should not play any role in this, as they are also not allowed to do in the whole world, because no human being should harass, attack and harm another person because of his religious sectarian attitude and faith. Because every faith must be a personal private matter and must not have any influence on the interaction among human beings. If a human being wants to believe the imbecilic nonsense of a religious or sectarian doctrine and worships some deity and thus feels committed to a faith, then this is absolutely and solely his personal and private matter, which is nobody else's business, and thus must never lead to religious or racial hatred. So if a human being is a slave to a religious faith, he should not and must not be despised or hated as a human being because of it. But, if he is a righteous human being, good interpersonal relations should be maintained with him. He should be appreciated, honored, and his faith and his opinions in this regard should be left to him. In spite of a religious delusion, a human being is a being who deserves respect, dignity, and honor, and it does not matter what religion or sect the believer belongs to. Consequently, he must also not be harmed or psychologically harassed if he walks righteously, leads an orderly, law-abiding life, does not commit any offense, and thereby segregates himself from the norm of righteousness and from society. There is never a reason for hatred against human beings who are slaves to a faith of the manifold religions, all of which would be pointless to list, which is why only a small number should be mentioned to give an impression of the diversity of religions. Therefore, no human being should ever be harassed in any way for the sake of his or her faith if he or she belongs to any religion or sect, such as, for example, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, an Oriental religion such as the Yazidis, the Mandaeans, the Yarsan, Zoroastrianism, Hinduism, a Central Asian and Far Eastern religion such as Confucianism, Neo-Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, Falun Gong, Kalasha religion, Siberian or Korean shamanism, African religions such as the Yoruba religion, Voodoo and Akan religions, South American indigenous religions, North American religions, Oceania religions such as cargo cults, Ngara Moda Ngai, Papuan religions, Polynesian religions, and many others, as well as the almost innumerable and indeed hundreds of sects that have emerged from these religions. But there are also many other religions, such as the ethnic religions of Europe, the neo-ethnic religions of Europe of syncretism, African American religions, Indian Christian religions, Buddhist Shintoist religions, European paganism and neo-paganism and Scientology, as well as diverse and very numerous historical religions, which also include mythologies and very numerous worldviews. Crypto-Christianity and the underground churches should also be mentioned, so there is also something to be said about this, such as that in crypto-Christianity the Christian faith is practiced in a hidden way, but at the same time a public commitment to another religion is revealed. So that crypto-Christians are human beings who follow Christian customs and traditions, although they formally belong to a different faith community. Similarly, such practices also exist in other religions and sects, but this is usually not publicly known. What is to be said about underground churches can be explained that this refers to secret Christian places for religiously motivated gatherings of communities that are subject to repression and persecution by the state or by clergy. Theologians, religious servants, clerics, priests, or ministers of God, etc., and are therefore forced to follow a different faith. They are exposed to repression and persecution, and are therefore forced to meet secretly in secret places and private houses for worship and meetings. This was already the case, for example, with various early religions, and also with Islam and Christianity, as well as with the French Huguenots and with regard to the Bohemian Brothers, the early sect followers of the Kali goddess in India, who roamed the country and strangled and robbed wandering merchants and many other human beings with a 7-knotted silk noose. So believers, who as such were subject to repression and persecution, could only organize themselves in secret after the persecutions began. In Christianity in Ireland, from the 16th to the late 18th century, public worship and all historic church buildings were reserved for the Anglican Church of Ireland. Consequently, Catholicism could only be practiced in secret. After 1945, under the ruling communism in the Eastern European states, there were also Christian denominations operating in secret, playing with their freedom because they opposed the state-imposed atheism. In North Korea, there is still an underground church that operates in secret and has about 300,000 believers in Christ. Underground churches can also be found in small networks in Islamic countries, such as Persia or Iran, as well as in Afghanistan or Somalia. For the most part, the believers consist of Christian converts from Islam who pursue their cults and religion underground in secret places because they cannot attend services of the traditional churches. Otherwise they are harassed, as for example in Iran, where leaders and members of Christian house churches, etc., are regularly arrested and sentenced to harsh prison terms.
With this, you have again provided some clarity and stated facts about which, as far as I know, the majority of Earth humans have little or no knowledge, and thus do not know how very wide-branched, diverse, and numerous religions and sects are among the earthly folks.
Unfortunately, it is so that on the one hand, human beings do not care about such facts, live only for themselves, and do not think about things and world events further than the tip of their nose. While on the other hand, nothing is taught in this respect in the ordinary schools and in the schools of religious instruction, as well as nothing is made known in the public media.
You can really say unfortunately to that.
But the unfortunately can definitely be used for the near future, to which I think that purely nothing will change for the better, good, and positive in terms of world politics and country politics.
Unfortunately, this will indeed be inevitable, because so far there are no signs that anything will change for the better, the good, and the positive. Also, our foresights have not yet yielded any findings that anything would happen in terms of positive change in the foreseeable future.
I do not think that is to be expected. But how long do you look into the future, that is to say, how far do you do foresights?
Forecasts have been made for the next 1,000 years. But because of the unpleasantness of what is to come, we should not speak openly about it and avoid fear and negation. But as far as our forecasts are concerned, they only amount to a few decades, but they also show very unpleasant things. But we should not speak openly about them either. Besides, you yourself know many things that will happen in the future and will bring much misery, suffering, and hardship to Earth humans.
Sure, of course, it does not have to be that details are brought up. Consequently, there should also be talk of something else. So I want to ask what you Plearen call your space-time structure or your dimension. I have wanted to ask this for a long time, but I have always forgotten.
Ankar Universe.
Thanks. I have also learned a lot from Svath about the dimensions of our creation. Universal consciousness, which is of benefit to me today, because lately I have been asked more often about the subject of dimensions, especially by Atlantis, Andreas, and Marianne, so I cannot help but give some explanations. But it takes a lot of patience and also a lot of time to make sure that everything is understood, which is why I thought I would elaborate and write down the most important things as well as possible. But that also takes a lot of time, so I want to talk to you about it now, and simply elaborate on what your father Svath taught me. Besides, it is not only various core group members and passive members who are playing mind games about the dimensions topic, but also scientists and other persons, whereby especially the scientists have strange ideas about parallel worlds and parallel universes. Svath, however, has never said anything to me about such a thing, which is supposed to be a mirror universe, or several, and which is supposed to be such that it would be a mirror image of our universe. Of course, scientists are not simply thinking of our present dimension, but of a differently dimensioned universe that is mirrored and aligned with our present, so that, for example, if I could go into such a parallel universe, I could meet myself there in a double version or as a mirrored person and talk to myself, whereby my double and I would always make the same physical movements, carry out the same actions, and thus also make the same gestures, as well as speak the same words, etc., as I said. However, your father Svath never said or taught me anything in this regard, but only spoke of completely different dimensions or space-time structures or of universes, which I was also able to visit with him and experience and also learn a lot there. As a result of which I assume that Svath was either unaware of such mirror or parallel universes, or that they do not exist, which is why I want to ask you about the correctness.
Parallel universes and parallel worlds, as you describe them, are unknown to us, as they are also unknown to the Sonaiern. If you should also ask about their findings and knowledge in this regard, as I assume, because you always want to know everything very precisely when you bring up questions.
Yes, I wanted to, because the Sonair are still far ahead with their technology compared to yours. Since you, like the Sonair, are much more highly educated compared to the knowledge of earthly scientists, and are tremendously advanced in terms of the entire earthly technology, and therefore should also have knowledge of parallel worlds, which is not the case according to your words. I think that the whole mirror universe issue is based on pure fantasy. This also explains to me why Svath never said anything about parallel worlds and parallel universes in that sense, and also did not explain how such mirror worlds, etc., are accepted by earthly scientists. But then I do not want to hold back now and talk about what I have learnt from Svath about the dimensions, that is to say space-time structure, and I will also use the term Ankar when I talk about the Plejaran space-time structure. I feel the need to explain what I have been asked about several times recently, which is why I want to talk about it now, and then hear your opinion. According to the questions put to me, it has become really necessary to explain a little further and in more detail than usual with regard to creation or creation universal consciousness. Its 7 belts, planes, the material belt as well as its dimensions or space-time structures, which are also called universe universes or cosmos, cosmoi or world spaces. Although I think the whole thing will take some time and then you might have to leave and therefore we cannot turn to the many notes anymore, but I should really talk about it, because I also promised.
If that is the case, then I do not mind if the time lasts.